The United States declared its independence from Great Britain on July 4th, 1776, on the premises of freedom. Noble men and women fought in this cause, and many lost their lives for life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. These men and women were from all over the world. In fact, all were immigrants. These immigrants are the founders of this great nation. However, throughout the history of the United States, our government has enacted legislation which has gone against the fundamental principles of this great country, in turn enslaving and ostracizing its own people. The question is, do these injustices still occur today? First, let's take a look at the Japanese-American internment that occurred during World War II. Japanese-American internment was the relocation and internment in 1942 by the United States government of approximately 110,000 Japanese Americans and Japanese who lived along the Pacific coast of the United States to camps called war relocation camps in the wake of Japan's attack on Pearl Harbor. The internment of Japanese Americans was applied unequally throughout the United States. Of those interned, 62% were American citizens. 62%. President Franklin Delano Roosevelt authorized the internment with Executive Order 9066, issued February 19, 1942, which allowed local military commanders to designate military areas as exclusion zones, from which any or all persons may be excluded. This power was used to declare that all people of Japanese ancestry were excluded from the entire Pacific coast, including all of California and most of Oregon and Washington. In 1944, even the Supreme Court upheld the constitutionality of exclusion orders. Finally, in 1988, President Ronald Reagan signed legislation which apologized for the internment on behalf of the U.S. government. The legislation stated that government actions were based on race prejudice, war hysteria, and a failure of political leadership. The U.S. government eventually dispersed more than $1.6 billion in reparations to Japanese Americans who'd been interned and their heirs. Although many people probably felt that this legislation was justified at the time, it was a decision that, with hindsight, the U.S. government agreed was completely wrong. Another instance of injustice in American history is seen with government-enacted black segregation known as the Jim Crow laws, which were state and local laws in the United States enacted between 1876 and 1965, which authorized racial segregation in all public facilities, with a supposedly separate but equal status for black Americans. In all reality, this led to treatment and accommodations that were usually inferior to those provided for white Americans, which allowed a number of economic, educational, and social disadvantages. First of all, where does the term Jim Crow come from? The origin of the phrase Jim Crow has often been attributed to Jump Jim Crow, a song and dance caricature of African Americans performed by white actor Thomas D. Rice, which first surfaced in 1832. As a result of Rice's fame, Jim Crow had become a negative, demeaning expression with the understanding or the meaning African American by 1838, and from this the laws of racial segregation became known as Jim Crow laws. Institutionalized racial segregation was ended as an official practice by the efforts of such civil rights activists as Clarence M. Mitchell, Rosa Parks, and Martin Luther King Jr., working during the period from the end of World War II through the passage of the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act of 1964, supported by President Lyndon B. Johnson. Many of their efforts were acts of nonviolent civil disobedience, aimed at disrupting the enforcement of racial segregation rules and laws, such as refusing to give up a seat in the black part of the bus to a white person, Rosa Parks, or holding sit-ins at all-white diners. By 1968, all forms of segregation had been declared unconstitutional by the Supreme Court, and by 1970, support for formal legal segregation had dissolved. Finally, on July 29, 2008, the House of Representatives passed a resolution apologizing to African Americans for slavery and the era of Jim Crow. In passing the resolution, the House acknowledged the injustice, cruelty, brutality, and inhumanity of slavery and Jim Crow. Now let's talk about a very important issue in America today, illegal immigration. From March 2007 to 2009, there were 300,000 people who immigrated to the United States. Half of them were Mexican. There were 11.1 million illegal immigrants in the United States in 2009. Obviously, this issue is affecting the nation as a whole. Some claim that immigrants come to this country and take all of our jobs, don't pay taxes, and cause violence. And others claim that many immigrants do what others wouldn't do under absurd circumstances for absurd pay, with the argument that this country was founded by the hands of immigrants. Both cases are very true. Aren't there people who don't pay their taxes and take advantage of the system everywhere? Some may reason, why don't those people that want to come to the United States just do it the legal way? Perhaps there lies a fundamental lack of understanding that in order to get a visa to enter the country legally, it could take 18 to 25 years. Some people flee their country and come to the United States because their very life depends on it. 18 to 25 years later, it could be too late. By that time, anyone who's searching for hope, looking to escape raging drug wars, domestic violence, to find a better life for family, to build a life that wouldn't be possible elsewhere, will have been completely diminished if they're still alive. One of the states that has been affected the most by immigration is Arizona, where the majority of illegal immigration into the United States occurs. As a result, on April 23, 2010, Arizona Governor Jan Brewer enacted Arizona Law SB 1070, which is the toughest immigration law seen in decades. It states that U.S. federal law requires certain aliens to register with the U.S. government and to have registration documents in their possession at all times. The Arizona Act additionally makes it a state misdemeanor crime for an alien to be in Arizona without carrying the required documents. Bars state or local officials or agencies from restricting enforcement of federal immigration laws and cracks down on those sheltering, hiring, and transporting illegal aliens. The intent in the legislation is an attrition through enforcement doctrine, meaning that the state is going to get rid of illegal immigration through enforcing the law. Critics of the legislation say it encourages racial profiling, while supporters say the law prohibits the use of race as the sole basis for investigating immigration status. The law was modified by Arizona House Bill 2162 within a week of its signing, with the goal of addressing some of those concerns. There have been protests in opposition to the law in over 70 U.S. cities, including boycotts and calls for boycotts of Arizona. However, polling has found the law to have majority support in Arizona and nationwide. Passage of the measure has prompted other states to consider adopting similar legislation. So how might a law like this affect someone like Jorge? Let's find out. In 1985, Jorge and his brother were brought to the United States from Peru by coyotes when he was just a little boy. His parents sacrificed everything to come to the States for a better life. Jorge, indeed, has made the most of it. In high school, he became the student body president, graduated with honors from college, and went on to become the director of Latin American Development and Marketing for a very prominent bank. Jorge is also the co-founder of a Latino Leadership Conference for Youth, a mentor, a soccer coach, and a husband and father of 5. He's greatly loved not only in the Hispanic community, but by everyone. And he's undoubtedly been a huge contributor in his community and a positive example. It would be very difficult to imagine life without him. This Peruvian-born man has made himself into an American hero. Let's say that Jorge recently entered the country illegally 2 years ago and currently resides in Arizona. What could happen? Well, first of all, Jorge could be cited for unjust cause by an officer and be sent back to his country of origin, which is Peru, away from his family forever, even if he's done nothing wrong. He could experience discrimination and segregation from others around him. Also, he's probably going to live in constant fear and anxiety of being deported. Because of worry or anxiety, he might have to leave or hide. This departure would be a great loss in the community. Is Arizona Law SB 1070 the present-day Jim Crow law enacted by the government, which promotes racism and segregation? Is this law good for our country? And finally, is this law just? That is for you to decide. This is Ms. Harper with Canal J. Hasta la próxima.